Can you hear me at the back? Okay, well, my name's Andrew Bridgen. Until 3.5 weeks ago, I was the independent member of Parliament for North West Leicestershire, and I've served there since 2010. Before that, I'm a comprehensive schoolboy. I won my first election in 1980 when I was elected head boy of school at the Pingle in Swadlincote, Derbyshire. It was a very comprehensive education. My major job as head boy was preventing the other pupils from burning the school down, because the teachers used to run off to the pub at lunchtime to try and recuperate, and I was left in charge of the school. And I was moderately successful. Obviously, I couldn't save the whole school, but 2 years after I left, they did burn the whole school down. So we'll put it that way. I'm the only member of my family ever been to university. I went to the University of Nottingham. And I studied, just because I was interested in it, biological sciences with biochemistry, specialising in genetics, behaviour and virology. Something, I don't know why I just chose those subjects. I felt attracted to them. Anyone would think there was a greater purpose to life. After that, I joined the Royal Marine Commandos as an officer. I was offered the chance to do a PhD at Nottingham in genetics, but I chose to do something else instead. I was actually a full career officer, but that didn't work out. I had a number of injuries, and my father was, when he was 48, had to have his first hip replacement, couldn't support the family, so I left the Marines, set up a business called AB Produce, and built that up over the next couple of decades to a 30 million turnover food business, handling 5% of all the fresh potatoes in the UK, doing food processing, packaging and distribution. So I'm actually a qualified transport manager as well. And I was making lots of money. I was making about £3 million a year. The company was making about £3 million a year. I'd cleared the company of debt, so it was all bunts. I was making £1 million a year myself, paying tax on that, and I'd got everything pretty much sorted. I got my mansion, we got the Range Rover, I got my Aston Martin, and life was pretty good, but it wasn't good because things weren't going well in the country. I'd become chairman of the Institute of Directors for the East Midlands and served on the East Midlands Regional Assembly. I was actually living just over the border in South Derbyshire. I was brought up at Netherseal, the most southerly village in Derbyshire. That's why I went to the Pingle School. I built a new factory in Measham, in northwest Leicestershire. Invested £5 million, 11-acre site to create 300 new jobs and set all that up. And I had to deal with Northwest Leicestershire District Council, who were absolutely appalling. And the East Midlands Regional Assembly told me that I was building my factory in the least business-friendly planning district in the whole of the East Midlands. And they weren't wrong. They were 100% right. They were appalling. And being the chairman of the East Midlands IOD, I got to meet all of the New Labour business ministers through various functions I spoke at and attended. And these people, I realised they were definitely going to bankrupt us. They had no knowledge about business. They were completely incompetent. And I went and told all my friends back at home what I was finding out. Now, I thought that we had the finest, the best people with the best of intent were in Parliament sorting out these nation's problems. And I was bitterly disappointed. And I used to drink with a group of sort of small and medium-sized business people, normally on a Friday. Partners were always there. And every Friday it was always the same. They were always moaning about the state of the country, how bad it was. And it went on week after week after week after week. And eventually I lost it. And I think it must have been 1 pint of Marston's Pedigree too many. And I said, look, I've just had enough of this. Every Friday we come here, everyone's moaning about the state of the country. There isn't going to no one's going to do anything about it. It's down to us. And they must have had 1 pint of Pedigree too many as well, because I said, look, if you stand for the council, in northwest Leicestershire. So there's been Labour since it was ever formed in '83. It's always been Labour. You stand, you stand, you stand, you stand, you stand, you stand, you stand. I don't know anything about this politics business, but the people involved in it, they're not that bright. I reckon we could crack this. You stand for the council. We'll take over the council. I'll stand for MP. I'll win that, and then we'll take over. It'll be our problem. We can get it sorted. And to a man and a woman of them, they all agreed. So we all joined the local Conservative Association in Northwest Leicestershire. I think it had 55 members before we took over. I said, I'll put all the money up for the leaflets. I went and did the exams and passed for... you actually have to have exams to be a candidate for the Conservative Party. I know it doesn't. You don't think they did have to pass an exam, but apparently 70-odd% of people fail. Goodness knows what they're like. So I went and did that, and we ran the 2007 elections in Northwest Leicestershire, and for the first time, and the old guard of the association said that well, we don't put a full slate of candidates up. You know, you're spreading yourself too thin. Well, I mean, I don't think if you don't put a candidate up, you can't really ask someone to vote for you if you haven't got a candidate, can you? Even if you set a paper candidate. So we put a full slate of candidates up, and we put leaflets out, something they were pretty unaccustomed to. And we amazingly had the biggest swing in the country against Labour in the 2007 elections. Labour had control since the local authority was formed, Northwest Leicestershire, and we took them down to 5 councillors out of 38 in one night. And the sitting Labour MP, well, he wasn't too happy, to be honest. He wasn't really too happy at all. Is that better? Yes. Oh, that is better. So, in 2008, David Cameron came to Northwest Leicestershire. I'd been adopted as the candidate for the elections, whenever they were. We didn't know when they were going to be. Despite the fact we'd had the biggest swing in the country against Labour and taken control of the council, Cameron, in front of constituents, told me that Northwest Leicestershire was a dump, and he wouldn't be giving me any money for my election campaign, and we were never going to win Northwest Leicestershire. So I told David Cameron, who was only leader of the opposition at the time, we didn't really see eye to eye. I said, well, actually, that's my home now. I live in Northwest Leicestershire. I've got my business in Northwest Leicestershire. And if that's what you think, David, the best thing you can do is never come here ever again. And I will win it. And he is a man of his word sometimes, because he never came to my constituency ever again. I think he went 14 times to Loughborough to Nicky Morgan next door, but he never came into Northwest Leicestershire. We didn't miss him. And in the 2010 election, I was very disappointed. I only had the second biggest swing in the country against Labour, 12.5% swing. I was beaten by Cannock Chase, so turned 4,500 Labour majority into a 7,500 Conservative majority. We got control of the council, and we started making real changes. Within a very short time of being elected, I was having surgeries where you have members of your constituency come and tell you their problems. And I met Mr. and Mrs. Rudkin, Michael and Susan Rudkin, 2 people who came to me with an unbelievable story of how they'd been fitted up by the post office, a government cover-up over a dodgy computer system, which was foisted upon the sub-postmasters by the post office. Now you all know it's called the Horizon system. And the story was unbelievable. Mr. Rudkin claimed that he'd become elected to be the representative for all the sub-postmasters in the UK. And so he passed the day-to-day running of the post office to his wife, Susan, and he was very chuffed that he'd been selected of all the sub-postmasters in Great Britain. He'd run the post office in Ibstock in the south end of my constituency for quite a number of years, and part of his duties, he had to go and attend various visits and negotiations, and one of his visits he got invited to, he said, was he got invited to go to Bracknell to Fujitsu's headquarters and go and see round. And they ran the Horizon system. They'd created it and they supported it. And he went there, he said, and everything was very good. He signed in the visitor's book and went in, and they showed him all round. He said, and then he thinks that they mistook him for someone else, got him confused with someone else. And they took him down into the basement and showed him all these IT engineers working at terminals. And he looked at the terminal and he noticed, because he knew the system, that it was the Horizon system that they were playing with. And they told him that they were sorting out all the mistakes in the system and they were correcting all these errors remotely, straight into the sub-postmasters' computer systems in their little post offices. And of course he was shocked at this, because whenever they prosecuted a sub-postmaster for fraud, having a shortfall in their computer, the post office always maintained in court that no one could alter the accounts in a sub-post office remotely without the sub-postmaster knowing all about it. Therefore, the fault had got to be with the sub-postmaster. They'd signed a liability that any shortfall they had to make up themselves. And obviously, this was not what had been said in court when his members, the sub-postmasters, were being prosecuted for fraud. Michael Rudkin then told me, he said he thinks that Fujitsu realised who he was after they'd shown him all of this. And they said they quickly bustled him out of the building, basically threw him out. And he got in his car and went home and went back to Ibstock, arrived late, got into bed with his wife. And then the next morning, before he was even out of bed, there was a knock at the door and there was a post office inspector there alleging that his wife was £44,000 short on her computer overnight, on the day that he'd actually been shown inadvertently the fraud that was being carried out against the sub-postmasters. And him and his wife were criminalised. Susan was prosecuted because she was in charge of the post office at the time, and she got a criminal prosecution. She didn't go to prison, but she got, I think, 400, 800 hours community service. She was tagged. They lost their position in the local community from being a pillar of society. They were seen as criminals who'd stolen money from the post office. And I looked at these people and I thought, why are you coming to me? You know, you're convicted criminals. I thought they looked like they were like 30 years older than me. It turns out they were 10 years older than me. They were just broken people. They were clearly destroyed by the whole situation. And I thought, why are you raking it all up? Because you're convicted. You've gone through a court of law. You know, it's a conviction. And I thought, why are they here? Because there's nothing in it for them. Raking it all up was clearly painful for them. It was been a very painful experience. But I thought they were telling me the truth, as fantastic as the story was. So I went to Parliament and I asked other MPs, have you had anybody who's been running a post office who's got, you know, a blemishless record, who's suddenly been accused of and been found guilty of fraud? And mysteriously, 5 MPs had. So there was Kevin Jones from Durham North. There was James R. Buthnott, former Chief Whip under Margaret Thatcher. He's now in the House of Lords, but he was an MP at the time. There's, I think there's a guy called Mike Wood, who was the Labour MP at the time for Morley and outwards. That's 4 MPs ago. And there was myself. And the other person who tagged on to all of this was a gentleman called Oliver Letwin, who was also the Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office, which runs the civil service. And he was David Cameron's chief political advisor at the time. So I have no doubt that whatever was going on in that group of 5 MPs, David Cameron was being told about it. We set up a meeting. They all claimed they'd got constituents who had been affected, who were sub-postmasters. We got meetings with the sub-postmasters representative, Alan Bates. We got meetings with Paula Venables, who was the head of the post office, and they were completely different meetings. The sub-postmasters were very grateful for anyone listening to their grievances. They were very open. When the post office came in, the chief exec, she had pretty much disdain for MPs. She certainly had disdain for me. She was always accompanied by two top lawyers either side of her. It wasn't open and transparent. It was very, very defensive. And I managed to engineer it because they kept saying that the Horizon system was a Rolls-Royce system. It was perfect. It was a bomb-proof system. And they said it so many times, and I said, well, if that's the case, you wouldn't mind us, you'll have no objection if we put forensic accountants in just to verify your Rolls-Royce system. And then I got them into a situation in the debates that, in these private meetings, that they couldn't get out of. And eventually they said yes, they would allow it. And I managed to get a man of high integrity, a contact of mine through the Institute of Directors, called Ron Warmington. He got his own company called Second Sight. It's a boutique forensic accountancy firm you've never heard of until the post office scandal. It was going to be the last job he did before he retired. The main business they did actually was working for banks. When bank employees steal £50 million, you never hear about it, and they bring in Second Sight. They find out how they've done it, and they make sure they put systems into that financial institution to make sure that no one can ever do it again. Ron, it would be the last job he did before his retirement. I knew he was inscrutable as far as integrity was concerned. I knew he'd do a good job. And I warned them. I said, look, you're going to have to make the Cabinet Office pay for this investigation. And Oliver Letwin overruled me and said, no, the Post Office are going to pay for their own investigation. I said, well, how's that going to work? The moment that the investigators find anything, they're going to say, well, we're paying you, so they're going to, he who pays the piper calls the tune. They're going to put pressure on Ron Warmington and his team because they're paying the bills. Anyway, I was overruled by the other MPs and the Post Office paid. And within months of Ron starting his investigation, that's exactly what happened. To the point where the Post Office were redacting Ron's reports before the MPs could see them. And he was feeling that they were not letting him look everywhere he wanted to look for his evidence. And eventually Ron was forced to leak the unredacted reports to myself and to James Arbuthnot. And of course the Post Office threatened to put him in court for breach of contract. The full force of the law was thrown against him. But fortunately, about the same time, we had a whistleblower come forward who gave evidence, and he was from Fujitsu, and he said basically that everything that my constituent, Michael Rudkin, had said was 100% true. Fujitsu had really, really tried to cover it up. For 18 months, even though I'd got the emails, proof from Mr. Rudkin inviting him to Fujitsu, Fujitsu maintained that he'd never been on their premises at Bracknell. And when I said he signed the visitor's book, they came back 2 days later and said, we've lost the visitor's book for the day in question. So massive cover-up. And you'll have heard now about the Post Office scandal because despite the fact that everything that was in that ITV docudrama, Mr. Bates and the Post Office, I'd said all of that 9 years ago in Parliament. It's on the Hansard record. You can look it up. It's in the debates. Nothing was done until the public knew about it. And for 5 years, I had gone to every media outlet in the country. And their representatives are all in the lobby in Parliament. And I said to them, look, I've got the evidence here. I've got the evidence from the Fujitsu whistleblower. I've got the evidence from Ron Warmington. This is the biggest miscarriage of justice in the country's history. At least 776 it was at one stage. It's now over 1,000 people were convicted wrongly and got criminal records. Massive miscarriage of justice over many years. You'll get an award if you run this story. And every single one of those media outlets refused to run the story. Refused. And you might see some analogies with what we're going through now, whether it's about net zero, the vaccine harms, the excess deaths, the WHO treaties that are looming on the horizon for us, all these horrors. Nobody wants to talk about any of those things as well. Many of you will have seen the ITV docudrama, which is a version of events. I made my own little video, which will tell you the truth about what really happened in the post office scandal. So David, I hope you can see at the back. Can you play the video?